I walked into the conference room holding my proposal folder. My palms were sweating. 3 weeks of preparation sat inside that folder. A plan I believed could save my startup and finally earn my family's respect. They were all seated. My older brother Cole occupied the head of the table like he owned the world. My Aunt Diane was adjusting her pearl necklace. My Uncle Warren leaned back with a ready smirk. My cousin Mira was already whispering to someone and giggling. Then I saw the cardboard box sitting in front of the empty chair. My chair. Inside were my things, my framed photo, my spare charger, my notebook. Someone had cleared out my office without telling me. Cole pushed the box toward me. "We voted," he said flatly. "We're cutting dead weight." Aunt Diane smiled like she was doing me a favor. The room laughed. Cole slid a termination letter across the table. Already signed by everyone except me. Uncle Warren called my startup an embarrassment to the Quinn name. I didn't scream. I picked up the box and walked out with my chin up. But in the hallway through the closing door I heard Cole clearly. "We'll buy her platform's assets for pennies. She won't have a choice." My name is Aria Quinn. That was the day my family stopped pretending they wanted me to succeed. 2 years before that boardroom ambush, I was sitting at my kitchen table in a small apartment, staring at lines of code on my laptop screen. Empty coffee cups surrounded me. It was past midnight, but I was too excited to sleep. I had been building my platform for 8 months. A tech tool that helps small businesses manage and automate their customer data at a fraction of what large companies charged. I believed in it completely. My family did not. At a Sunday dinner I described my progress. Cole went back to his phone. Aunt Diane called entrepreneurship just a phase. Then Mira leaned over and looked at my logo on my screen. "Did a child draw that?" she said. The whole table laughed. I smiled, said nothing, and kept coding. Then something strange happened. A major investor named Aaron Briggs had requested 3 meetings by email. He seemed genuinely excited about my platform. Then suddenly nothing. Every message I sent afterward went completely unanswered. He had simply vanished. I couldn't understand why someone so interested would disappear without a single explanation. I spent 2 weeks trying to understand why Aaron had gone silent. Then a mutual contact named Wes told me the truth at a networking event. Cole had called Aaron directly. He told him I was emotionally unstable, that my startup was collapse-bound, and that any investment would be wasted money. He said he was protecting everyone involved. I confronted Cole that evening. He shrugged without looking up. "I was protecting the family from embarrassment," he said. "You should be thanking me." I held back everything I wanted to say and left. That night, Wes forwarded me an email thread he had been accidentally copied on. My stomach dropped as I read it. Cole hadn't warned just one investor. He had reached out to 3 separate funding contacts over several months, quietly killing every serious conversation I had worked to build. I sat at my kitchen table and read the emails twice. Then I saved them all to a separate drive and backed them up in 2 different locations. My family wasn't just doubting me. They were deliberately tearing down everything I was building. And I now had the proof. 2 weeks after finding Cole's emails, I sat down at my family's weekly dinner and announced clearly that I was still moving forward with my startup. I was not stopping. The reaction was immediate. Cole set down his fork to laugh properly. Uncle Warren shook his head slowly, the way he did when something genuinely pitted him. Mira whispered to the cousin beside her, and they both covered their mouths. Aunt Diane used the smooth, patient tone she reserved for being cruel while sounding reasonable. "Aria, you're starting to sound delusional. We're not laughing at you. We're concerned." Then my grandmother Eleanor looked up from her end of the table. She was the person whose opinion carried the most weight in our family. She studied me over her reading glasses for a moment. "Stop pretending you're extraordinary," she said quietly. "It's unbecoming." The table went still. I set down my napkin and left without finishing my meal. In the dark car on the drive home, I made a promise to myself. I would never ask this family for a single thing again. The months that followed were the hardest of my life. Without investor funding and with Cole quietly spreading damaging stories in business circles, every door I tried to open started closing. I took every freelance job I could find, website builds, data audits, tech support contracts, and put every dollar straight into keeping my platform running. I was surviving on 4 hours of sleep most nights. My small team began to fall apart. Jada left first for a job with benefits. Then Owen. Then my last remaining developer told me apologetically that he couldn't keep working for deferred pay. I didn't blame any of them. Meanwhile, I heard through a contact that Cole was telling people at industry events that my startup had already failed. That I was a cautionary tale. People were apparently nodding and agreeing. Then the email arrived. My platform's hosting provider sent a final notice. 14 days to pay the outstanding balance or my service would be permanently taken offline. 14 days. I sat at my kitchen table staring at the screen. I had come too far to stop. But I had no idea how I was going to survive this. On the 11th of those 14 days, a message appeared in my inbox from someone I hadn't spoken to in nearly 3 years. Rowan Hale and I had been classmates in university. We weren't particularly close, but we had always respected each other's work ethic. He had heard through the tech community that I was in serious trouble. His message was short and direct. He was launching a small but credible tech incubator and had desk space available immediately. He was offering microfunding, not life-changing money, but enough to keep my platform alive for another 90 days. In return, he simply asked me to join his first cohort of founders. No conditions. No strings. Just one professional extending a hand to another. I accepted within the hour. I paid my hosting bill the next morning and moved into the incubator 2 days later. On my first day, Rowan sat across from me at lunch and said, "There's someone I want you to meet. I think she might be exactly what you need right now." He slid a business card across the table. I read the name and felt something quiet shift inside me. Lena Park did not waste a single word on politeness. She arrived at the incubator in a simple gray blazer, set her coffee on the table, and spent 40 minutes taking my platform apart piece by piece. She pointed out every weak feature, every clunky decision, every assumption I had built in that didn't match what real users actually needed. It was uncomfortable. It was also the most useful conversation I had ever had about my own product. "I've seen hundreds of these pitches," she said, leaning back. "Most I forget before I reach my car. Your idea has something, but not for the reasons you think. The idea is solid. The execution is lazy." She looked at me steadily. "Rebuild it. Not patch it. Rebuild from scratch. Show me a new version in 60 days and I'll consider writing a check." I went home that night and opened my laptop. I didn't sleep. By sunrise, I had scrapped half my original code and started building something sharper, cleaner, and genuinely better. For the first time in months, I felt like I was actually moving forward. 61 days later, I presented Lena with a completely rebuilt platform. Same core idea, but leaner, faster, and genuinely intuitive. She asked hard questions for 2 hours. I had answers for every single one. She signed a check before leaving the room. I spent the next month in a blur of focused work. I went from 2 beta users to 20, then 200. The feedback was overwhelmingly positive. People were recommending the platform to others without being asked. I rebranded cleanly, new name, new logo, new visual identity. Everything felt sharp and deliberate. Then a respected tech publication called Forward Quarterly ran a profile on me. The headline called me the underdog founder quietly reshaping how small businesses handle customer data. The article went live on a Thursday morning. By Friday evening, my inbox held over 60 new messages. I was reading through them when my phone buzzed with a call from a number I recognized immediately. I let it go to voicemail and kept reading. Cole had noticed. Cole arrived at the incubator the following Monday without warning. He walked through the glass doors in his expensive coat and looked around at the open desks and whiteboards like he had wandered into the wrong building. I saw him before he saw me. I kept my expression completely neutral. He sat across from me without asking. "You need to stop using the Quinn name in press coverage. People are asking questions." "It's my name too," I said calmly. He leaned forward. "Our company operates in exactly the space you're trying to break into, Aria. This isn't cute anymore. You're creating complications." He said it like a threat dressed as advice. What Cole hadn't considered was that I had studied the Quinn Corporation's weaknesses carefully for months. My platform was targeting the exact market segments where they were overpriced, outdated, and quietly losing ground. I wasn't accidentally disrupting his industry. I had designed it that way from the very beginning. "I appreciate your concern," I told him pleasantly. Have a good week, Cole. He stood and left without another word. I watched him go, then went back to work. 3 weeks after Cole's visit, a thick legal envelope arrived at my address. Inside was a formal notice from the Quinn Corporation claiming my rebuilt platform infringed on their intellectual property. It was a complete lie. My platform shared no code, no design, and no process with anything the Quinn Corporation had ever built. The claim was entirely without merit, and I was certain they knew it. This wasn't about law, it was about pressure, making the legal process expensive and exhausting enough that I would simply stop. I called Lena immediately. She listened without interrupting. Then she said 4 words. Fight it. Don't fold. She connected me with an intellectual property attorney named Mr. Carter, who reviewed the claim overnight and confirmed what I already knew. There was no legal basis whatsoever. We filed a detailed counterclaim the next morning. By afternoon, the news had reached a tech media outlet. By evening, 3 separate journalists had picked up the story and were already asking both sides for comment. My phone buzzed continuously. I turned the screen face down and finished the feature I was coding. Then I picked it up and started responding. The story spread faster than I had expected. By the following morning, it had landed on the front pages of 2 major tech news sites. One headline read, "Young Founder Fights Back Against Family Empire's IP Claim." Public reaction was almost entirely in my favor. Strangers who had never heard my name 48 hours earlier were sharing the story and calling the Quinn Corporation's legal move exactly what it was: a desperate attempt to silence a direct competitor. My inbox filled quickly. New investors were requesting calls. Journalists wanted interviews. A podcast focused on underdog startup stories asked to feature me in their next episode. And then, buried in the middle of all those professional messages, I found one from Aaron Briggs, the same man who had gone completely silent after Cole warned him away. His message was 3 careful sentences. He said he had followed my journey, that he had made a serious mistake in listening to Cole, and that he would be grateful for just 30 minutes of my time. I read it twice. Then I closed the email without replying and made myself a cup of tea. I thought about Aaron's email for exactly 1 day. Then I made my decision. I wasn't deeply angry at him. He had made a business choice based on false information someone had deliberately handed him. But trust, once broken, that cleanly needed more than 3 polite sentences to rebuild. And honestly, I no longer needed what he was offering. I called Lena instead. "There's interest from Aaron Briggs," I told her. "I'm declining it. I'd rather build with people who believed in me before the headlines." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Good, because I've been making calls of my own." Over the next 2 weeks, Lena introduced me to 4 investors from her personal network, people who asked careful questions, did thorough research, and made decisions based on substance. When the round closed, I had secured funding that more than tripled my operational runway. With that capital, I hired a full engineering team, expanded my sales operation, and launched in 3 new markets simultaneously. My platform was no longer a struggling underdog project. It was a real growing company with serious momentum, and we were only just beginning. 2 months after my funding round closed, a former Quinn Corporation employee, who had recently joined my team, passed along quiet news. The family company had assembled an internal task force and spent considerable budget trying to build a competing version of my platform. I wasn't surprised. It was exactly the move I had expected Cole to make. What I didn't expect was how spectacularly it would fail. Their version launched without proper user testing or market research. It was slow, confusing, and significantly overpriced compared to mine. Within 3 weeks, public reviews were damaging. Users were comparing both products directly and calling the Quinn version a pale imitation. Their own existing customers were quietly switching to my service. Internally, I heard the board was furious. Questions were circulating about who had authorized the project and who was responsible for the wasted budget. I pulled up the latest market share data that evening. The Quinn Corporation had dropped 4 full percentage points in our shared segment in a single quarter. The trend line pointed clearly in one direction only. They were bleeding. And it was accelerating. A month later, I attended a regional tech conference. I wasn't hiding anymore. I had earned my seat at the table. I was walking between sessions when I heard raised voices around the corner near the catering tables. I recognized them before I turned. Cole and Mira were having an argument that had clearly moved well past the stage of being private. Cole was jabbing at his phone screen. Mira was shaking her head loudly, insisting the failed platform had been his idea, not hers, and that she refused to absorb any of the blame for what was coming. They didn't see me. I walked past calmly and found my next session. But later that evening, waiting for my car outside the venue, a man in a dark blazer approached. He introduced himself as Philip Strand, a senior board member of the Quinn Corporation. He glanced around before speaking quietly. "I've been watching your company closely," he said. "I think we should talk somewhere less visible than this." He placed a business card in my hand and walked away before I could respond. I looked at it for a moment, then slipped it into my jacket pocket. I met Philip Strand at a quiet coffee shop far from either of our offices. He arrived on time, ordered nothing, and got directly to the point. The Quinn Corporation was in serious trouble. Costs had been climbing for over a year. The failed platform project had burned a large budget with nothing to show. Key clients were leaving, some specifically switching to my company. The board was deeply fractured and openly blaming Cole's decisions for the deterioration. "We'd like to explore a collaboration," Strand said carefully. "A licensing arrangement, perhaps. Something mutually beneficial." I listened to everything. Then I thanked him for his honesty and told him I wasn't interested in a partnership. He nodded, as if he had expected that answer. We shook hands and I walked to my car. I sat in the parking lot for several minutes, turning over the numbers he had shared. Partnership wasn't the right move. But something else was forming clearly in my mind, a thought I hadn't fully considered until this exact conversation. What if I didn't partner with the Quinn Corporation? What if I simply bought it? I spent the following week buried in numbers. I gathered every public financial filing the Quinn Corporation had submitted over 3 years. I mapped their client losses against my own acquisition data. I examined their debt ratios, overhead costs, and revenue trajectory carefully. The picture was unmistakable. If current trends held for another 2 quarters, the Quinn Corporation faced one of 3 outcomes: a desperate merger with a weaker competitor, a severe restructuring that would gut the company regardless, or a complete collapse. I brought the full analysis to Lena on a Friday afternoon and spread the pages across her desk. She studied everything quietly. The room was completely silent except for the faint sound of pages turning. Then she looked up with sharp, careful eyes. "Do you want to acquire them?" she asked. I had been asking myself the same question for 7 straight days. "Yes," I said. She nodded slowly. "Then we do this properly. No rushing. No emotion. Pure strategy." I drove home that evening carrying the quiet, serious weight of exactly what I was about to set in motion. For the next 3 months, I worked with the focused, quiet purpose of someone who knew exactly where they were going and had no intention of announcing it early. I expanded my platform deliberately into 3 market segments where the Quinn Corporation was at its weakest: mid-sized regional businesses, nonprofit organizations, and independent retail chains. These were customers the Quinn Company had consistently underserved and overcharged for years. My pricing was fair. My support team responded quickly. My product worked the way customers actually needed it to. People switched with almost no persuasion required. I also hired carefully. Several talented developers and product managers had quietly left the Quinn Corporation over the previous year, worn down by the toxic internal culture. I spoke with 6 of them. 5 joined my team. They brought real skill, fresh energy, and knowledge that proved genuinely valuable. Then, on a Tuesday morning in my 2nd month of expansion, I opened my weekly analytics report and read the headline number twice to be certain. My platform had officially overtaken the Quinn Corporation in total active users for the very first time. I saved the screenshot and kept working. Cole called an emergency board meeting at the end of that month. Philip Strand sent me a brief text the night before, and I read between the lines easily enough. What I heard afterward told a grim story. Cole had stood at the front of that boardroom and tried to present the company's problems as temporary and manageable. The shareholders hadn't accepted that framing. 2 of the largest ones spoke sharply about consecutive quarters of losses, the failed platform project, and the shrinking client base. One had reportedly said the word bankruptcy out loud, which sent a visible shock through the entire room. Cole had no real solutions. Mira sat in silence. Uncle Warren delivered vague reassurances that convinced nobody. 3 days after that meeting, a formal letter arrived addressed to me from the Quinn Corporation's financial advisors. The language was careful and corporate, but the meaning was unmistakable. Given the current positions of both companies, the board was open to exploring acquisition discussions. I read it twice, then called Lena. "It's time," I said. "I know," she replied. "The opening offer is already drafted." Lena and I spent 10 days building the acquisition proposal with the precision of people who understood that every single word in a document like this carried real weight. We worked alongside our legal team, our financial advisors, and a corporate strategist Lena had trusted through 2 previous deals. We examined every asset the Quinn Corporation still held, their remaining client contracts, their physical infrastructure, their internal systems. We determined fair value carefully and built a number that was serious without being generous. The proposal was thorough, professional, and left no room for easy rejection on technical grounds. At the top of the cover page, where the acquiring company's name appeared, there was no mention of the Quinn family, no reference to my history with them, no trace of what any of this meant to me personally. The proposal came from my company alone, the startup they had laughed at, the platform they had tried to steal, the business they had done everything in their power to destroy. I signed the document. I sealed the package. My team hand-delivered it to the Quinn Corporation offices on a Wednesday morning. By afternoon, I received confirmation that the board would hear the bid. I slept more peacefully that night than I had in 2 years. I wore a simple dark blazer on the morning of the board presentation. No jewelry. No family name on any of my materials. Just my work and my numbers. I entered the Quinn Corporation's headquarters through the main front entrance. The receptionist recognized me and faltered for just a moment before directing me upstairs. I took the elevator to the executive floor without hurrying. When I walked into the conference room, the board was already seated. Strand gave me a small, composed nod. The company's external advisor sat to one side with folders open. At the far end of the table, pale and rigidly still, sat Cole. Beside him was Uncle Warren, whose familiar smirk had completely disappeared. Mira was 2 seats down, staring at the table's surface. I set my materials at the head of the room, the exact same room where they had once pushed a cardboard box toward me and laughed while they did it. As I connected my laptop to the screen, I heard someone at the far end of the table whisper to the person beside them, "She's here to buy us." I pressed play on my first slide and began. The presentation lasted 2 hours. I walked through every number without drama and addressed each question from the board with data I had prepared in advance. When the Quinn family's advisors pushed back on our valuation, my financial team produced 3 independent assessments that supported our figures exactly. Cole attempted to interrupt twice. Both times the board chair asked him to wait. The second time she didn't frame it as a request. When the presentation ended, the room fractured into private conversations. Lena sat beside me in calm silence while the board and shareholders conferred in the hallway for 40 minutes. When they returned, the vote was called formally. The result was decisive. The shareholders approved the acquisition by a clear majority. With that vote finalized, the Quinn Corporation, the family empire that had been used to humiliate me, erase me, and steal from me, was no longer controlled by the people who had built it. Cole's face went completely still when the final count was read aloud. Uncle Warren stared straight ahead. Mira looked at her hands without speaking. I kept my expression composed throughout. This moment was not about them. It never had been. The board convened the following morning to complete the final formalities. I sat at the table with Lena and our legal team on one side and the Quinn Corporation's remaining advisors on the other. When the board chair stood to announce the incoming leadership structure, the room went very quiet. The role of Chief Executive Officer will be assumed by Ms. Arya Quinn, effective immediately. The words settled into the silence of the room. Across the table, Cole went rigid. Uncle Warren made a small strangled sound. Mira pressed her lips together until they disappeared from her face entirely. I accepted the role with a single composed nod. No speech. No dramatic gesture. No smile aimed at anyone in particular. After the meeting ended, Cole caught up with me in the hallway. He looked like someone who hadn't slept properly in days. He stopped directly in front of me, his voice low and tight, and asked the only question he apparently cared about. Are you going to fire us all? I looked at him steadily for a moment. I'll be in touch about next steps, I said evenly. Then I walked past him down the hall without looking back. I didn't fire them. That would have been too simple and, honestly, too kind. It would have handed them a story to tell, that I had been vindictive, that I abused my position, that the entire thing had been driven by personal revenge. Instead, I restructured. Working with our HR and legal advisors over the following 2 weeks, I introduced a new governance framework for the combined company. Executive roles now required demonstrated competencies and clear performance benchmarks reviewed quarterly. All major decisions flowed through a restructured leadership committee, rather than concentrating in any single person's hands. Cole's role was reassigned to a purely advisory position with no operational authority whatsoever. Uncle Warren's direct reports were redistributed under a newly hired operations director. Mira retained her title but lost every meaningful responsibility that had been attached to it. None of them were publicly fired. None of them were humiliated. They simply found that when they tried to make decisions, there was nothing left to decide. Every lever they had once controlled was now held firmly by someone else. They had all the titles and none of the power. And there was absolutely nothing they could do about it. 3 days after the restructuring announcements, my grandmother Eleanor appeared at my office door. She was 81 years old. She didn't knock. She simply stood in the doorway until I looked up, then walked in and sat in the chair across from my desk. For a long moment, neither of us said anything. Why are you being so kind to them? She asked finally. Her voice was smaller than I remembered it. There was no manipulation in the question. Just an old woman genuinely trying to understand something that didn't fit her experience of the world. Your cruelty never made me stronger, I told her quietly. My success isn't about punishing any of you. It's about freeing myself. She stayed still for a long time. Then she gave one slow, small nod, as if carefully filing the answer away somewhere. She stood, walked to the door, and left without another word. I watched her move down the hallway. Then I turned back to my desk, to the work in front of me, and to the name printed clearly on the door that led into my office. Mine. I straightened the papers in front of me and got back to work. In the months that followed, I poured myself into building something I was genuinely proud of. I launched a mentorship program within the company for young developers and first-time founders, people who reminded me of the girl who had once coded alone past midnight in a small apartment, running on cold coffee and sheer determination. I rebuilt the internal culture completely. Promotions were based on merit. Honest feedback was welcomed and received safely. People who had been quietly miserable under the old leadership started actually looking forward to coming in. The business grew. Former clients returned. New ones arrived steadily. Every quarter moved in the right direction. Cole, Warren, and Mira faded from relevance. They kept their titles and attended meetings where they had nothing real to contribute. I heard they spent a great deal of their lunches complaining to each other. I didn't lose a single night of sleep over it. One evening I stood at my office window and looked out over the city lights spreading wide in every direction. I thought about the girl with the cardboard box. The one they had laughed at. The one they had tried to erase. Then I smiled, turned back to my desk and kept building. They laughed at my failed startup. Now I was their CEO.